On February 21st, hundreds of students of all ages gathered in Washington, D.C. and Tallahassee, Florida to demand political action on gun control. The gatherings came 1 week after 17 students and staff were killed by a lone gunman in Parkland, Florida, but the painful memories of Columbine, Sandy Hook, Las Vegas, and dozens of other mass shootings were with the protesters. In Summit County, Summit School District has worked proactively for more than a decade to keep students safe. All 3,500 students in the district practice mandatory drills, and staff regularly train for emergencies like an active shooter and even wildfire evacuation. Soon after Parkland, Krystal 93 talked with school district officials about protocols already in place for student safety and why open communication about safety and mental illness is the best defense against the unthinkable. Phil Lindeman, Krystal 93 News Director, and I'm in the studio today with Julie McCluskey and Travis Avery. They are with Summit School District. Thank you for coming in today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Sure.
Of course. And we are talking Florida. A school shooting on February 14th left 17 dead and 15 wounded in Parkland. It's less than a week old. Still, lots of people across the country are mourning. Lots of people are thinking, how are students staying safe? Whether they go to school in Florida or whether they go to school in Summit County, Colorado, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So wanted to start right there at the top. Right now, what kind of plan is in place at Summit Schools for an active shooter sort of situation?
Well, good question, Phil. And let me start by saying, first and foremost, when there is a tragedy like what we saw in Florida last week, it impacts all of us across the nation, not just those of us in schools, but those of us with children and kids in schools. And like many members here in our community, we all want to know what can we do to help protect our kids and make sure that our kids are safe. First and foremost, Summit School District takes the safety of our staff and our students as our most important priority. We are committed to making sure that not only our facilities are safe, but also that we're doing the right kind of training and preparation to help keep everybody safe in the event something does happen. We have practiced lockdown drills and evacuation drills for decades, and we continue to improve those practices and make sure that the adults in our buildings really know what to do in the event something happens. Travis, what else would you add to that, just in preparation?
Julie, I think you touched on a couple key things that are real important in the preparedness for these type of emergency situations, and that we take a lot of time with here in Summit. I think one of those, and this is pretty obvious to folks who come into our schools, is that there's elements of physical security at all of our buildings. And some of those are visible, the primarily method of those being our secure vestibules that you encounter coming in the main entrance of every school building that we have here in Summit, every public school. And then the other piece of that is then what procedures and practices do we have in place that are a little bit less visible that staff and students train on, prepare for on a monthly basis. So I would say those are the two kind of key areas where we spend a lot of time addressing this, certainly on a monthly basis.
Great, yeah, monthly basis. So this is going on consistently throughout the year. What are some of those monthly trainings or monthly things that are being done?
So I use monthly primarily because we do at least one type of emergency drill every month. Several months we'll do more than one, and they vary. We use a set of practices called the Standard Response Protocol that came out of the shooting over in Bailey, Colorado several years ago at Platte Canyon High School, so a real local connection to that process. And that SRP, Standard Response Protocol, involves 4 basic response procedures at the classroom level. They include lockdown, which is specific to, and people are real familiar with these days around active threat, active shooter situations, but they also involve lockout, which is in response to an issue out in the community, kind of a criminal issue in the community where you don't want anybody coming in the building. And then you have shelter, which is more using the building as protection. Sometimes that's weather, could be hazmat type situation, or even something as benign sounding as a wildlife on the playground, has some potential there. And then the last piece is evacuation, and this is everybody will be familiar with this as the old fire drill that we've all been doing in every school building for a long time. But evacuation is a more comprehensive term that covers any reason why you might be getting out of the school building.
So people, students, teachers, everybody, they're practicing this stuff often. They're not unfamiliar with what to do if something like this happens. And that's part of the point, right? Repetition really does kind of make people a little bit more comfortable when and if the crazy happens or the unthinkable sort of happens.
That's right, Phil. And I think we have just shared communication with parents, and we try to push this out regularly to let them know that we are practicing. We are trying to be prepared as we can be. And one of the points that we maybe you can help us with, and we certainly want our community to understand, is that importance of communication. That when our kids or our staff members see something or hear something that concerns them, we ask them to report it. We realize that communication around safety and security is really at the core of keeping everyone safe. And when we share that responsibility and we work in partnership together, we can prevent something as tragic as what happened in Florida or any one of a number of other incidents. We encourage our kids to report that information to a trusted adult or through our Safe to Tell anonymous and confidential tip line, a way that our kids can let us know if something's going on that we should be aware of in a way that protects them and their identity if they're uncomfortable speaking up and speaking out.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I think that sometimes, communication, like you said, it is the number one tool, but sometimes can feel like a slippery slope for somebody. They don't want to rat out on somebody, or they don't want to be the bad guy in a situation. They just they want to report something that might make them uneasy.
Yep.
But they also don't want it to become a huge deal. They don't want it to blow up. And these are in place to kind of help people do that. Now, when somebody calls the Safe to Tell hotline, what can they expect? What sort of information should they be armed with?
Good question. I think the most important piece is as much detail as they have available to them about the nature of their concern that they're reporting. The who, what, where, when, why type set of information is really key. That allows it could be the school, it can also be law enforcement who follow up on those tips depending on the nature of the tip, the time of day or night that those tips come in. It depends on who follows up with that, and there's certainly a little bit of coordination that occurs between the school district and local law enforcement to get the best response to those tips. But really, the specifics of their concern. Why are they calling? Who are they calling about? What happened specifically? Details around what made them have that concern and feel the need to make the report in the first place.
So the more details, the better. But the more details you can come up with. Now, how about opinion? Should you try to keep opinions to yourself on, I think this person is incredibly dangerous, or is that okay to say?
It's probably okay. I mean, I think we certainly try and operate within the sphere of fact as best we can, but I think there is that, spidey sense, that sneaking concern, that sneaking suspicion that exists out there, and in studies of disasters and emergency response and things like that, those feelings are validated, so we don't want to ignore them, but it's certainly valuable. That feeling is certainly more valuable when it's backed up by some specifics, and certainly with Safe to Tell or as Julie mentioned, making a report to a trusted adult. The use of electronic social media is useful. Screen grabs, things like that have also always been useful in kind of being, hey, this is the evidence of what's going on here.
Great. And that is one of the things that we've been seeing, too, is that, a lot of these situations had social media almost hints. But, hindsight's 20/20 a lot of times. But like you said, never a bad idea. If you do see something that makes you uncomfortable on social media or something that somebody is publicly putting out there, that's fair game.
Yes, and Phil, for anyone who isn't familiar with Safe to Tell, you can go to tell.org to get information about the types of reports that can be filed. Really, this tip line is open to anyone in our community. We give the information about Safe to Tell to our students at the start of every school year, and we certainly reinforce it all year long. Helps that we're talking about it today, so you can help us reinforce it as well. And I should take just a moment to highlight our very important and valuable relationship with local law enforcement and local first responders. They do a tremendous job guiding us in our safety and security practices, whether that's the design of the vestibules, as Travis mentioned earlier, or in our monthly drills and training protocols. We are so grateful to the Summit County Sheriff's Office for their partnership in providing us with 2 school resource officers, one who is at Summit Middle School every day and one who is at Summit High School every day. And these individuals really build those relationships with kids, help kids understand what a good friend we have in law enforcement, and then partner with children when kids see something or have a concern. They know of a trusted member of law enforcement right there in their midst that they can talk to. So we're super grateful to this community for all the support that we get.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because I know that for a while it almost seemed like resource officers were one of the budget items that was being cut from a lot of people. So here in Summit, we still do, students at the middle school and high school have access to resource officer daily.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, great. Now, I wanted to talk, a little bit of the flip side of things. So obviously, if somebody sees something that concerns them, they should report it. How about somebody who's just in a bad way right now? Somebody who needs help. What are some resources for someone who is not feeling good, maybe even considering bringing a gun to school?
So I think we're fortunate in Summit that we've got a lot of diverse resources available to us in the mental health field in particular. I think, Phil, you asked kind of a broad question, and I think there's a couple of slices in there in terms of, one, kids who might be considering an act of violence. They probably aren't, unfortunately, real likely to come in on their own, but they do broadcast, is what some of the psychologists have called it, broadcast kind of clues that they are feeling that way and having these thoughts. So, that goes back to our previous conversation about, having that feeling or that picking up on those bits of evidence and letting people know. But certainly we do deal with, as is a national conversation right now, the mental health concerns that are certainly prevalent here in Summit as well as nationally, and they do push down into our youth population, and unfortunately we even do start to see them down into our elementary school population in this day and age, unfortunately. But kids are under a lot of stress for a lot of different reasons, and so in that regard we are pretty fortunate in Summit that we've got a lot of mental health resources. Specifically in the schools, every school has a school counselor at some level in the school most days, from the elementaries all the way up to the middle and high school, who have several school counselors in the building daily. We also have a very fortunate partnership that creates what's called a school-based health center, which is a joint partnership between the school district and the Summit County Community Care Clinic. And they provide both primary care and dental services, but also related to this conversation, importantly, we have behavioral health therapists available to the majority of our student population through a referral process that often starts with our school counselors.
Yeah, lots of resources if somebody is willing to go out for them, and that they are right there at the school too. You don't even have to go search around the community for them. My final big question for the school district was, like you said, Platte Canyon, after that, there were some updates to standards and updates to procedures. Anything currently being looked at? Anything new in the works, or even talk of ways to continually improve safety at schools?
Great question, Phil. As you might be aware, there was a school shooting down at Arapahoe High School. And out of that event came a piece of legislation called the Claire Davis Act. It was named after Claire, who lost her life in that shooting. And from that, the school districts across the state have received more specific guidance about threat assessments, both for students that may be considering self-harm or harm to others, and how we can improve our practices around training for staff, as well as what process we go through with mental health professionals and law enforcement to ensure that we're doing everything we can to keep our kids safe. Travis, anything to add to that?
I think another important piece that the community's provided for us here in Summit is within our bond and mill, and Julie will correct my language if I get it wrong, construction bond and mill levies that passed by the population not too long ago that we are working on projects in every building, and those do involve some physical security upgrades, particularly around the vestibules and making them a little bit more functional, and upgrading them. So, we've been real supported with our construction projects in general by the Summit County population, but specific within that to this conversation is some security upgrades to all buildings.
Great. How long have both of you been involved with Summit School District? How long have you been there?
I've been there for over a decade, primarily in the role of communications, but I also did some work early on around bullying prevention.
Okay.
And interesting how that feeds into so much of this work around safety and security.
Yeah, it feeds into quite a bit of it.
I've been with the district 18 years, the last 8 of which have been doing emergency preparedness.
And I was going to ask over time, because I'm from Jefferson County myself, so I grew up not too far from Columbine High School, and I remember a lot of the sweeping changes that happened right after Columbine. How have you two seen school safety and proactive safety change since Columbine to now? Because that really does seem like Columbine was the watershed moment when everybody thought, okay, we need to have elements in place to protect students.
I think there's been a lot of change, obviously, since Columbine. I think you're right. It was a big moment in the nation's history in terms of the need to change practices around student safety and staff safety at schools. I think the challenge, and this has been an ongoing evolution in the practices, is for all the conversation around physical security, and a large district like Jefferson County School District have their own kind of security staff. Some larger districts have their own police force. I'm thinking about LA and New York, big metropolitan areas in particular, but it's really, and particularly here in smaller districts like Summit, the important thing is being able to train staff on as up-to-date practices as is possible. I would say our district's fairly forward-thinking in having my position relative to a small district and maintaining the funding for that. So I think that's good for Summit. So I can, I go to conferences every year, try and stay abreast of training, and then push that back out to staff. And really the thing, as Julie mentioned, about threat assessment we've been working on this year. Another thing is just coming back to the idea of kind of crisis or emergency teams, where it's not one or two people's responsibility in a building or in the district, that it's really the team approach. Everybody has responsibility in this. And yes, it's not, there's a push-pull with that need to educate students, and this kind of can sometimes pull away from that. But I think the teachers here get that we need to spend some time with it. We need to be aware of it. We need to be doing our best to implement up-to-date procedures and practices and stay on top of those things, and at least put some thought to it, because I think that's a real important thing. If you don't think about these bad things, which I know can be frightening for people, but if you don't think about them, talk about them, have a plan for them, then when something does happen, your response is really not in a good place, versus if you've spent some time with it, you've got a general plan and can apply that to a variety of different emergency situations, you'll be much more successful.
Yeah, a united front sort of situation is much better than everybody doing their own thing. Like you said, having some standards and protocols, and your position in general is really a big help for the school district as a whole.
Yes.
Great. Well, Julie and Travis, that was all that I had for you. Thank you again for making time to come in and talk school safety here in Summit County. I appreciate it. And we will, of course, be staying in touch.
That would be great. And Phil, we appreciate this opportunity to share the message about safety and security, and we encourage anyone who has questions or concerns to contact us. We can be reached at our district office at 368-1000 or online at summitk12.org.
Great. The door is always open.
Yes, it is.
Of course. Great. Travis and Julie, thank you for coming in.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Phil.
Of course. Phil Lindeman talking school safety on Krystal 93.